We should probably get this started.
This is unlike any Ouija movie you have ever seen before. We are talking OUIJA Japan. This one is directed and written by Masaya Kato. And I don't know if this is the same Masaya Kato that once starred along with Mark Dacascos in the 1997 movie Drive as the advanced model. Who knows? I couldn't actually confirm this for the review, but there you go. Maybe it is. Now this movie, by the sounds of it, you may thinking it's a horror, and although there is a supernatural element to this movie, it's actually more of an action film. In fact, it's actually more of a very specific type of action film, that being very similar to Japan's own Battle Royale. Well, what is the story, you might be asking? Well, I'm going to tell you. So it focuses on this American woman called Karen, who has moved to Japan with her Japanese husband and is really trying to kind of get along with the local group of women. Her only real friend is a woman called Satsuki, who speaks pretty good English, and they go on a trip out in the country somewhere to scout out a location for some type of camping trip. And there's a group of women and one guy, and they manage to piss off the local fox god known as Kokkuri-San or something like that, and end up going in this tournament ultimately, very much like Battle Royale, where all the women are pitted against each other in a quest for survival with only one winner. So that's basically the setup here. Yeah, not really much like your Western style Ouija movies, you might be saying, and it isn't. It's really not a horror film in any sense of the word, but obviously I think probably people would associate it with it, but there you go. Anyway, so let's talk about what works first of all in OUIJA Japan. Now, I have to say this is a very low budget movie, and it's very evident on screen that is the case. Now, it is actually filmed on location in Japan with a Japanese cast, but there is probably about a 50-50 split in regards to language, because our central character of Karen really has trouble speaking Japanese. A lot of her dialogue scenes, and she is the main character, are actually in English, and even ones that aren't, her friend has to then explain what's going on. So if you're worried about a lot of subtitles here, although there are some, especially when the Japanese characters are talking to each other, there is actually quite a lot of English dialogue as well, and it almost has a conceit to hold your hand really. If you're worried about reading too many subtitles, that it's almost like you're in the position of Karen, where you need things spelled out for you sometimes, and it makes it a little bit more digestible, I think, for people who don't really like watching subtitled movies. It does benefit obviously from having this authentic Japanese flavour, and that's again quite unlike any Ouija movies that you would see in the West. And here's where I think the real kicker here is the one thing that this movie I think really plays a lot of tribute to, and that is video games. This movie feels like it is a commentary of what it's like to play video games in real life. Now we've seen stuff like Free Guy quite recently, that was a depiction of a video game but through the eyes of very human-like avatars. This one is almost like what would happen when the conceits in games, for example, in-game purchases and stuff like that, would translate to real life. And it's really bizarre, as you'd probably expect only from Japan. But it is quite fun. So, when the women go to this particular area, they're all having this mysterious app that's downloaded on their phone, and as the killing starts, people can get perks, so basically in-game purchases, and they actually sacrifice a portion of their life force to get variety of weapons, or it might be other perks, for example something called the God's Eye, which is where you can spy down on someone and things like this. There's a variety of perks that are available, very much like your in-game purchases in sort of modern video games. And I actually worked in the game industry for over a decade, so it was kind of a quite fun little nod to the kind of certainly the modern kind of style of gaming. We have a variety of different weapons, from machine guns, handguns, baseball bats, samurai swords. So there's kind of a lot of hardware on display here. And, you know, obviously it's essentially a nearly all-female cast. There's like 2 male characters, and they're really very minor parts, to be honest with you. So it's nice to, but you might think kind of like it doesn't do a very good job of characterization, but I have to say I think this movie actually does. So you do get a variety of these kind of like these Japanese women kind of showing different kind of you know, personalities, some with more sort of bitchy attitudes, some maybe a little bit more friendly, some maybe a little bit more militant, things like this. I mean, there are some kind of typical kind of like follow the kind of flock types as well, but you know, we do actually get a reasonable amount of kind of characterization here. And I think the character of Karen, I do have some issues with this, we'll come on to. You know, she does feel very, very awkward. You kind of feel like she is so out of their depth, kind of going into obviously a foreign country, you know, very alien like Japan, very kind of different culture, and is well out of her depth. And you really do feel the kind of the awkwardness of her trying to be able to kind of communicate and really failing and not really understanding the kind of the culture, but doing her kind of best to try and get along with it. Obviously, with a movie like kind of a battle royale style premise, you would expect a fair amount of violence. There are some fun kills here, to be honest with you, and a couple of reasonable effects, especially involving, I would say, one of the one male character in this kind of group. So what doesn't work in this movie? I've got to say the first act is rough. The first act is you're kind of set up, you're getting to know the characters, and the problem here is that the acting is incredibly bad. The acting from the majority of the cast, I think with maybe the exception of the actors who play Satsuki, is probably the best one, I would say. The acting here feels incredibly awkward. Some of the kind of line delivery is very stilted, especially from our main character of Karen, although I will say I did think her performance improved as the film went on. But nonetheless, initially it's kind of very awkward. There's scenes, for example, where you almost kind of see her trying not to laugh in front of the camera, which is kind of praying to this kind of like statue thing. But even some of the kind of the physical acting from some of the other cast as well, some of their dialogue is extremely kind of like, you know, hammy and stuff like that. The acting isn't good. And just that it has a very kind of low budget feel to it. Unfortunately, it's taken the decision here to use things like CGI blood. And in a low budget setting, having blood coming out, I don't think it's too much to ask if you're not going to have much in the way of effects. But yeah, CGI blood, with the exception of like 1 or 2 shots, but for the majority of stuff, yes, it's CGI blood. And I've got to say, I think these supernatural elements are not particularly kind of well handled here. And you know, we have this kind of like this fox kind of goddess type sort of character that shows up, and who is the kind of like the spirit of this kind of fox deity, and ultimately the one in charge of this kind of like game and app. And you know, it's just kind of hard edits to kind of to show her appearing and then disappearing and stuff like that. It's kind of jarring and very kind of low tech, and unfortunately really underscores that kind of low budget. And I have to say, if you are wanting a movie that makes sense and is logical, then this movie isn't for you. I mean, they even kind of make commentary about it in the film. For example, they are actually watching their kind of fellow, these women are watching their kind of fellow combatants through a camera and on their phone, and someone makes a comment, well, who's there? Who's filming this? Because there's no camera there, and this is one of the apps, and obviously, you know, we have a tech-savvy kind of fox spirit here that is able to make an app and make guns appear from from nowhere, and being able to kind of transmit camera images where there's not a camera there. So yeah, you know, if you want kind of a sensible kind of plot that really makes logical sense, I mean, yeah, you know, in paranormal films, magic stuff happens, supernatural stuff happens, but I have to say you have to have a very large dose of suspension of disbelief for this one, because it is so kind of bonkers, which is a double-edged sword, because it, you know, like I've said, if you want to have a logical film with you know, realistic kind of take on a genre, this isn't it. But the other side of the coin is that it makes it kind of fun in a sort of a weird way, because it's so bizarre. It's so kind of out there. And there's a kind of a, you know, we have a somewhat of a kind of a twist. I think it's fairly obvious about maybe what will happen there, because ultimately the game is kind of spelled out what you've got to do, so you know that something's going to be happening towards the end of the movie. Like I said, this is an interesting concept. I feel the concept here is strong, although bizarre, but the execution is low budget and amateurish. So it's, can you get over that? I do think this movie does have some elements of fun and weird kind of kookiness, and it's such a bizarre and odd choice for a kind of a movie that it's in one way worth watching. But it's like I said, it's poor acting, fairly kind of like poor kind of like technical side of stuff in regards to you know, shooting and things, and absolutely makes no sense. But I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10, because it's just an odd concept that I think is knowingly kind of like schlocky in a way, and has a kind of a fun commentary on kind of like game culture, which I did enjoy. So if you are a kind of a fan of video games and you don't mind a low budget movie without a lot of kind of actual on-screen kind of effects and things like that, you can do worse, I think. And it's so kooky and bizarre, you kind of can't help but kind of like it a bit. But don't be expecting a polished, you know, well-presented product, because it's kind of rough. So it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.